exactly such a background, having worked on high-speed rail projects in the world, not in the United States, in the UK. He's coming from there, and he's done exactly such projects for high-speed rail around the world.
Unless there's further questions, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Schenk moves, Mr. Crane seconds. Madam Secretary, call the roll. The motion, I should read the motion. It's resolved that the board delegates to the Chief Executive Officer the authority to enter into a contract and subsequent amendments of a non-material nature with PricewaterhouseCoopers for financial consulting services specified in the request proposal HSRA 11-15.
That was my motion.
And that was my second.
Mr. Umber?
Aye.
Mr. Crane?
Aye.
Mr. Giordano?
Aye.
Ms. Flores?
Aye.
Mr. Cox?
Aye.
Ms. Schenk?
Aye.
We'll next move to the corridor selection criteria, and I'll first entertain public comments. For those of you who weren't here at the outset of the meeting, I suggested that you pay close attention to those who comment prior to your comments to make sure that we're not just repeating what was said in advance. So let me start with Supervisor Mike Maggard.
Good morning, members. Thank you for the opportunity to make comment. Kern County would like to compliment the authority on your recommended choice of the initial segment of high-speed rail being made and the criterion that you've chosen. The criterion direct you to hold the most, to build the most useful infrastructure at the least cost and in the least time. They promote the overall connectivity of the California rail system, and they should result in an immediately usable segment that will markedly improve rail service. In short, they ensure that taxpayers will start seeing a tangible return on their investment as soon as possible. Naturally, we think the best way to meet the selection criteria is to build the first segment in San Joaquin Valley. We have the lowest cost per mile, so more track can be built on the ground to connect two of the valley's major population centers and bring an immediate improvement to rail service. We're also pleased to receive your assurances that the federal grant application won't remove any heavy maintenance sites that are now under study from further consideration. Kern County has two heavy maintenance facility sites that offer excellent value and overall suitability, and the donation of an industrially zoned site by Paramount Farming would save time and money in acquiring land for this important piece of the high-speed rail system. To sum up, Kern County supports the selection criteria. We think that the valley would be a great place to start building, and when you're ready to build the heavy maintenance facility, we have a couple of good places we think you should put it. So we invite you to join us for a site visit. We'd like to give you a little taste of life as it should be in Kern County, and thank you again for the good work that you're doing.
Thank you, Supervisor. Next, Mr. John Ritchie. And after Mr. Ritchie will be Deborah Moreno.
Oh, yeah.
Vice Chairman and board members, my name is John Ritchie with Paramount Farming. We have recently pledged the high-speed heavy maintenance facility to the authority at no cost. We want to let you know that Paramount plans to be a partner in the high-speed rail through California. We further pledge as a company and as a strong landowner and business entity in Kern County to support high-speed rail and bring our public and private sectors together to create a constructability that will allow Kern County to go forward. We thank your staff for all their help in answering our recent questions that we've had and concerns, and we look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your offer. Ms. Deborah Moreno, and after Ms. Moreno, Bob Snadi. I think it matters.
Can you just make sure the microphone is switched on?
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Honorable Vice Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Deborah Moreno, and I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. The Board of Directors of the Greater Bakersfield Chamber and our 1,400 member businesses and organizations are excited about the promise of high-speed rail in California. In fact, the Bakersfield Chamber of Commerce has been engaged in this project from the very beginning and worked in the earliest stages to bring other communities in the San Joaquin Valley on board with the goal of bringing this concept of high-speed rail to California and, of course, through our valley. It's because we've been engaged and supportive and have closely watched the development of this project all along that I encourage the authority to follow the legal criteria that will allow for the timely completion of an operable high-speed rail segment at the lowest cost with tangible benefits in the form of reduced travel time, rail connectivity, and testing and certification for the high-speed trains. Further, I urge the authority to seriously consider building in the San Joaquin Valley, which offers the lowest cost per mile. This would allow you to build more infrastructure to connect two major population centers with track that can graduate from Amtrak speed to the much higher speeds as the equipment becomes available. This segment is also the only area with a sufficient length and geography to safely test the high-speed trains, and it has the fewest environmental hurdles. Chamber members expect the high-speed rail to use taxpayer dollars reasonably, responsibly, efficiently. We therefore urge the authority to consider an alternative Fresno to Bakersfield segment that will reach all the way to Bakersfield, thereby improving the rail service for as many people as possible, as swiftly as possible, and at the lowest cost. And in business terms, it would give Californians and the high-speed rail the biggest bang for their buck. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Snoddy, and after Mr. Snoddy, Ms. Katie Stearns.
Good morning, Vice Chairman and members of the authority. I'm Bob Snoddy from Kern Council of Governments, and I'm speaking on behalf of Ron Brummett, our Executive Director. We'd like to thank the authority staff for their quick response to KernCog's letter dated October 20th, providing assurances that the grant application to the FRA does not preclude a heavy maintenance facility site near Sheffield. Kern supports the construction of the San Joaquin Valley segment, first extending all the way to Bakersfield. The Bakersfield Amtrak station can double as the high-speed rail terminal. We encourage the authority to look at alternatives that are cost-effective. KernCog supports the proposed criteria for selecting the usable segment in which to initiate construction of the high-speed train project, allowing for logical expansion and connectivity, minimizing construction and schedule risk, while providing for the most useful infrastructure at the least cost, will carry out the board's goal that the taxpayers start seeing a return on their investment as soon as possible. We look forward in working closely with the authority toward this end, and we'd like to personally thank Chairman Pringle. We'd also like to thank our authority member Katz and Flores for being very responsive to our letter on the 20th. We'd also like to commend your staff, specifically Mr. Van Ark, Kerry Bowen, for immediately turning over, and Ms. Vahidi for a quick 24-hour response to some questions that really concern us. We thank you very much for that.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Katie Stearns, after Ms. Stearns, Locke Holmes.
Thank you. My name is Katie Stevens, and I'm here on behalf of Mayor Swearingen from the City of Fresno, and I have a formal letter to submit, but unfortunately a lot of it is repetitive, so I made up some few comments that aren't repetitive. I just wanted to let you know that the mayor is absolutely thrilled about the focus on the core of the system, which is the San Joaquin Valley, so thank you very much. We look forward to continuing to work with you and the authority team to implement the project, to get the jobs out there in the valley. We're very excited. And then we're also, just to let you know, we're very pleased about the rescoping of the alignment, and we're happy and very willing to continue to work with you and your team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Locke Holmes, and then Brian Schmidt.
Good morning, Vice Chairman, board members, and Mr. Van Ark. Just two very brief comments on the legal requirements that are written into the founding legislation here for the board and for the High-Speed Rail Authority. One, I believe, was left out of the criteria we saw in the board's material, and that is the requirement which appears in Streets and Highways Code 2704, subpart G, 2704.01G, which requires that a usable segment, and I believe all four segments that we're talking about here today are defined as usable segments, not full corridors, Usable segment means a portion of a corridor that includes at least 2 stations. According to the materials included in the board's packet, there's only one segment in the valley, the Merced-Fresno segment, which includes 2 stations. We believe that's a mandatory criterion and should be included in the authority's selection criteria. Second, we find that the authority has included another mandatory criteria which appears in legislation and is now in Streets and Highways Code 270408F, and that is the mandatory requirement that the board shall give priority to corridors or usable segments thereof that are expected to require the least amount of bond funds as a percentage of total construction costs. And as the board's comment, or as the staff's comment notes, this applies equally to the 4 segments. In the federal funding application submitted to FRA, all of the state matching fund components were equal, about 30%. However, now that the federal government has allotted only $700 million for this project, it is clear that only the Merced-Fresno segment is the lowest cost, requires the lowest portion of state bond funding as a percentage of total construction costs. This is a mandatory requirement, and we would like the staff and the board to consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Scott.
well, Mr. Holmes, please, may we have a response from Mr. Van Ark or whoever else participated with respect to the first point you made about that 2-station requirement? In other words, is that a meritorious?
Right, and Commissioner Cobb, I noted that myself. I was going to ask Mr. Van Ark to request counsel to examine that and report back to us next meeting. That without objection.
Okay, presumably we are asked to consider adoption of the criteria as presented.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm assuming that they don't have the answer at their fingertips, but if they do, if Mr. Van Ark or Mr. Spanos has that answer, that would be a good time to hear it. If not, I think we'll have to.
I will do my presentation. I will do my presentation a little later after comment. But there is a difference between the requirement of the FRA being that we build a independent utility and the requirement of building a usable segment, or alternatively the requirements that finally are required to meet Prop 1A1 funds.
I agree.
And the usable segment has got many other aspects to it that we have to meet as well, and the project will not begin and start with the section that we're talking about, but will require further funding. Like we expect to get more funding in the year 2011, possibly even further funding in the year 2010 if we're still lucky. And then the project will finally be put forward towards the legislature as a usable segment to meet the Prop 1A requirements. But the definition of a usable segment in Prop 1A and the requirement in the FRA that the FRA has for an independent utility are somewhat different. We need to put forward to the legislature, to the Department of Finance, a funding plan. And in the funding plan, we have to explain how we will finally be building a usable segment, which could contain funds beyond the initial funds that we would be getting from the FRA, from ARA and FY 10 funding.
With respect, Mr. Van Ark, nevertheless, the applicable legislation which both the Commission, the authority, the board, and the legislature must look at, the applicable state requirement in the law is for a 2-station usable segment. And that's the answer to that is right in the board's material on page 5 of the legislative history packet.
Mr. Chairman, I'm still not clear as to the procedural effectiveness of putting this over for a month, or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it may be, with advice from council. Or putting it another way, is it meritorious to propose it as an amendment in addition to the selection criteria today?
Member Cobb, we do not believe that the start of this project and the requirement that is put forward to us that we're using the ARA and the FY10 funds, which need to be matched, and the requirements of Prop 1A are exactly the same. Prop 1A asks us to put forward a plan that we will be able to build and fund a usable segment. And we will be doing that. Before we build anything, we have to put that forward. A plan to be able to build, according to Prop 1A, a usable segment. And that usable segment will then include 2 stations and will then include more than what is in this starter line only. So we do not believe that they're in conflict with each other, and I would recommend that we could have the AG's office. The AG's office has been involved, but we would have the AG's office look at it again. But there are 2 phases to this. The one is the criteria of where to put the first money. The second is we have to go back, and it's in our paperwork, and put forward a funding plan. And the funding plan will incorporate how we will get to a first usable segment, which is more than just the starter portion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Durden.
Yeah, rise to a point of procedure. If we debate each one of the testifiers' comments when they come before us, we're never going to get through this issue. I wonder if we could take the testimony and then debate the issue when we get ready to adopt the measure. I share Quentin's concerns, by the way, but I don't think now is the time to bring them up because we'll never get through the testimony.
Your point's well taken, Mr. Durden, and we'll do just that. Although I'm not violating what I just said. I think it's implicit within the criteria that it is in compliance with California as well as federal law. But if it's not implicit, I suppose we could make it explicit. But having said that, why don't we move on to Mr. Schmidt?
Thank you very much.
And after Mr. Schmidt, Stacy Mortensen.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, board members. My name is Brian Schmidt. I'm the Director of Operations for the Altamont Commuter Express, the ACE service. ACE supports the criteria brought forward, as well as we support the Merced to Fresno segment. This segment not only meets the federal criteria, construction deadlines, but also provides a segment with independent utility with operating speeds of up to 220 miles an hour. As we've heard numerous times from worldwide experts, the biggest thing for a successful segment is connectivity. And the segment between Merced and Fresno provides that. You have existing passenger rail service that can get you down to Bakersfield, as well as up to Sacramento, and then also connecting regional and bus services going throughout the Central Valley and into the Bay Area. With this, the ACE feels that we'd be creating a solid foundation for expansion of new segments as moving forward, and also probably showcase to the state through the world that California can build a successful high-speed service. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mortensen, and then after Ms. Mortensen, Mr. Schoenbrunn.
Good morning, members. I'd like to congratulate you first on your the federal vote of confidence that you received again with the new money, and of course with that comes a lot of pressure, so you'll have my sympathy on that because we understand a bit what that's like. Today I'm representing a group of 20 agencies between Merced and Sacramento, all of the COGs, all of the cities, all 4 counties, and all of the transit districts. We've been working together since 2006, really trying to develop a unity position on passenger rail. And we've joined your team of engineers and staff to try to look at that segment as you have studied it in the environmental process. But for all of the relevant, compelling, and astounding reasons that my Merced colleagues have mentioned to you, we also support the first build-out being the Merced to Sacramento, darn it, I thought I said that in. Merced to Fresno segment. What hasn't been mentioned is from afar, we actually see those 2 locations as very good jumping off spots for other important places in the state. The federal mandate for the first build out in the valley brings with it the opportunity to build a segment very quickly, but it also brings about the need to be extremely creative and strategic about how the connecting services are pieced in. When we thought we might be building a much bigger system, I think we thought, oh, those connecting services will take care of themselves. But now, given what we have to work with, I think we really need to be ahead of the curve on that. And I would like to recommend to you that in whatever form you do it, you set up some sort of strategic connections ad hoc working group that can begin working on that now with the current providers and perhaps new providers that might need to come onto the scene to connect these trains to places and places to these trains. And I think we really have to do our part in the valley to support the other parts of the state as well. People need to come from there, people need to go there, and we have to have unity throughout the state. And I look forward to helping you, if we can, in the northern part of the valley on that cause. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Schönbrunn, followed by Mr. Bigelow.
Good morning, David Schönbrunn, President of TransDef, the Transportation Solutions Defense and Education Fund. This AHSRA process has caused you to lose sight of your statutory mission of building an HSR system. Right now, you are so focused on building a section of that system that you are ignoring the basics. You do not have a viable business plan. You apparently have no clue how you will go forward, given that Prop 1A does not allow you to offer a ridership guarantee. That would be an operating subsidy, which is impermissible. It makes no sense to us to proceed with building a segment before you have a plan that can deliver an entire system without ridership guarantees. We wonder if, in fact, the project is dead in the water for that very reason. You already know that you cannot complete the system without private capital. If your CEO truly believes what he has said publicly, that there will be no private capital until there is a federal commitment to this project of more than $15 billion, then you might as well shut down the authority tomorrow. With a House of Representatives controlled by Republicans, it's just not going to happen. The responsible alternative would be to put out an RFP seeking a design, build, operate, finance consortium. If you receive active expressions of interest, you will have a live project. If you don't have a live project, and there's no reason why Prop 1A funds should be spent to build a segment when that's not what the voters asked for. They asked for a system, and they authorized you to build a system. Building just a segment does not cut it. Thank you.
Next, Mr. Bigelow, followed by Ms. Barada Flores.
Good morning. Jim Bigelow with the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber. In the criteria, when you get into the lowest cost delivery of the segments, it creates big challenges in competition between the LA area and the San Francisco area because our cost to build transportation infrastructure is naturally more costly. In that respect, in the criteria, there's about 16 counties in the state that have a half-cent sales tax, recognizing they need to partner with other agencies to build transportation. In the case of the San Jose to San Francisco, you have the Caltrain corridor. You have 3 counties with their half-cent sales tax committed to a new electrified Caltrain under the first new FRA light rail or lighter weight electrified train. So I think there needs to be some consideration for in the criteria when local agencies bring additional money to the table beyond the AHSRA and the state bond, and it's not in this criteria that you're talking about. And unfortunately, in the segment that I'm near, we also have litigation, which is another one of the things that gives us a black mark on the criteria. So we would have a usable segment for 40,000 commuters a day on Caltrain, which would go up much higher on a rapid transit, lightweight EMU type electrified train system in a partnership. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration in the criteria. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Ronald Torres, and then Elizabeth Alexis.
Good morning, Tracy Verardo Torres with the California State Parks Foundation, and I'm here to talk particularly about Section C, the program-defined selection criteria, with respect to one of the areas that you may be considering related to the federal money, which is, of course, the Fresno to Bakersfield. On behalf of the California State Parks Foundation, we have had a dialogue with the authority for a number of years related to protection of open space and particularly state parks. Some of you, Mr. Dearden on the authority, remember a very heated discussion about Henry Coast State Park years ago. And what I'd like to remind the authority about is we, on behalf of our 115,000 members, would like to consider the approach that the authority took to Henry Coast State Park not as an exception, but in fact as a rule and as your preference in looking at the intersection of a newly constructed infrastructure, high-speed rail, and your existing state infrastructure, which is your state park system. We are particularly concerned also with respect to some issues down in Los Angeles on the LA to Palmdale section, particularly with proposals to do a major cut and cover under one of the existing urban parks serving a very low-income area in Los Angeles. The proposal right now under the alternatives in that section does, as I mentioned, provide a cut and cover alternative that would in fact take 3/4 of the park completely offline. It is a new park. And it was constructed, again, at the needs of that community. So in Section C, one of the areas that is mentioned in the staff analysis here is that these are additional selection criteria that are considered mission critical. And as I mentioned, I would hope that the approach that was taken years ago in identifying the impacts to Henry Coast State Park and, in fact, the authority's decision to avoid them altogether would, in fact, guide your review of future routes and their proximity to state parks. I would also just like to echo concerns in a letter that's previously been sent to the authority on that LA to Palmdale section, that to the extent the Commission will be taking action on that meeting actually happened in Los Angeles, where you're able to hear from affected parties directly and not here in Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Alexis.
Thank you. Elizabeth Alexis from CART. We would first like to say that none of the choices are particularly obvious for the first and potentially only investment that you will make in high-speed rail infrastructure. But given that these 4 segments are on the table, we would offer these comments. First, the closer in time that the selection criteria are established and the actual decision is made, the less they look like evaluation mechanism and the more it looks just like a justification for a decision, and that's concerning. Second, in terms of, given the challenges in terms of funding for this project, one clear criteria should be whether the money is being used on the main Bay Area to LA area line. Unless the board is considering building the Altamont corridor before the Merced to San Jose section, any money that's spent on the train tracks north of the Central Valley Y near Chanchilla would fail that test. We would offer 2 additional criteria. First, you should add the number of property owners that you will need to negotiate with as a criteria given the time frame crunch. Second, given the earlier comments, what additional funding would be required to meet the Prop 1A requirements? Finally, the threat of lawsuits should not be a criteria as it is a violation of the spirit, if not the letter of the law. CEQA specifically provides that the check and balance in a process in which the same agency, you, that wants to do the project also gets to approve it, is the threat of lawsuits. This should be removed as a criteria. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Troposis. Mr. Ben Troposis.
I think he's outside. Oh, there he
comes. So after Mr. Troposis provides a comment, I'll ask that the authority members withhold their comments and questions until after Mr. Van Ark does his presentation.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. Ben Troposis, City of San Jose. And I just want to take a moment this morning to really thank the authority and Mr. Van Ark, Dan Levitt, and the staff for working continually so cooperatively with the City of San Jose in our efforts to really make San Jose the gateway for high-speed rail into the Bay Area. As you know, we have been working diligently on putting together a cooperative agreement with the authority to address the visual and aesthetic elements of high-speed rail through San Jose. We're continuing to work on those elements. We, in fact, are having a community meeting this evening to accept public comment on both the co-op agreement and the authority's approach to San Jose. And we'll be going to our city council on November 16th to continue that conversation to ensure that the alignment through San Jose is the sort of facility that we all hope and expect it to be. So we just want to thank you for your continued cooperation and commitment to San Jose, and we want to reiterate our commitment to having high-speed rail be that Bay Area connection, whether it be to the Central Valley or the entire statewide system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Since Mr. Proposis is the last speaker, I did want to take a moment to extend a thanks to the city of San Jose through Ben for their remarkable cooperation. The level of misunderstanding within the community was extreme at one point. And the efforts by the individual city council members and the community groups and our staff in working with them was a model of how to do one of these projects. And the result is abject cooperation coming from the city, working now towards an objective which I think is very acceptable to the High-Speed Rail Authority and is now very acceptable also to the residents. And we might want to bottle that process and sell it to other segments.
Thank you. Good news is always welcome. All right. Mr. Van Ark. I think it'd be better if I put your seat down there.
Mr. Chairman, members, Cliff Eby is here to support me as he and I have been involved with staff and everybody to put together the criteria that we have forwarded and forwarded to you and put on the internet. Cliff Eby, as you must probably know, was the interim program manager for our PMT team, and later today I will introduce the new permanent program manager to you as well. But if we could stay and discuss this particular topic of selection criteria. I think firstly I would like to make mention, because possibly all public do not know this, that we did receive a letter from the FRA which is now very clearly specified that not only the $715 million that was announced during middle of last week, but that also the balance of the monies, the ARA funds, must be applied in the Central Valley. That means the FRA has actually determined that they would like their funding, ARA and financial year 10 funding, to be applied to either of the two sections in the Central Valley. That, of course, I do not believe that changes the selection criteria, but as we go through it, because the selection criteria should be neutral of the four segments, but I think it is just important to make that known to everybody that that decision was made, and we received that and put out a release this morning to advise everybody thereof. The ARA and FY10 grant proceeds are required and will be used to start and build one, as the FRA requires, independently operable or segment, and that will follow the environmental approval process. It will be conditional on us meeting the environmental process. We do not have that in place yet on any of the segments. We're busy working on that, and we plan to have that ready by the fall of 2011 as per the requirements of the FRA. The initial segment will obviously form or jumpstart the program, and it is clear that sometime after a decision is made on this initial segment, program management ourselves will have to come back to you and explain to you how we would like to stage the project from there onwards. In fact, it is part of one of the criteria. Building a high-speed rail line is about building many miles of interconnected high-speed track and a system. So it is very important that you understand
that we're going to have to come back to you as well and explain to you how we want to build the system as a whole at the end of the day. Because our understanding, and it's the obvious understanding of everybody, is we have to build a system that is going to be operable as soon as possible. And that means building many miles of track that are connected to each other. I want to jump and just advise you before I go into the details. For those that have read the criteria, you will notice that as we analyze the many requirements of the law and the FRA and those that you require in normal program management, that we will finally come to 4 major criteria which we believe encompass and incorporate everything that we need to incorporate to make this project a success, and will therefore also cover the requirements of the law. So there will be four final criteria which are broken down into subsections that would fall under the category of to provide logical expansion and evolution of the alignment to ensure an appropriate operational high-speed system at the end of the day. The second one is to minimize construction risk. The third one is to minimize schedule risk. And the fourth is to build the most useful high-speed train infrastructure for the least cost. So that is where we end up at the end of the day. Each of those segments, or each one of those criteria, are then split into variable sub-criteria. So, an update, you did get this documentation. Initially, the FRA requested from us to ensure that the grant or cooperative agreements are signed with them by the 28th of January. In the meanwhile, they have requested from us that these grant agreements are signed by December the 31st, 2010. That would be for the ARA funding and the financial year 10 funding. Again, conditional on a rod nod or the environmental work being done during the 2011 year. It is important that, I wanted to mention, I did receive, because I sent it out and asked for comment from board members, I did receive some comment, but in particular, one comment from Member Duridan. I will comment to those issues a bit later. So I will answer all those particular issues a bit later. The other comment that we got was basically one of confirmation that they were in agreement. I think we should do one thing and not forget that throughout this process, we must remember that Californian high-speed rail system will be the backbone passenger rail system for the state, and it needs to connect northern and southern California, the metropolitan areas of northern and southern California with each other. Cities of Los Angeles, Anaheim, San Diego, San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento. So that is what we need to achieve at the end of the day. The cities and those metropolitan areas have to be connected. The first step of the process, to select and then build the first segment, is really that. It's the first step. Building high-speed rail line means connecting metropolitan areas, and we have to get there. So we have to make a selection that will logically lead us to ensure that we meet our final goal, and the final goal remains building the complete system. So if I can refer you to the documentation, and I'll go through some of the documentation that we offered and sent to you, and I will talk about some of the criteria. We sent you Appendix A, which are the criteria themselves. Appendix B, the scoring criteria, which would not be used today, but would be used at the next board meeting. Do not forget, today is only about the criteria. The next board meeting would be about the selection. At this stage, going by the FRA letter, it would be the selection as to whether the Merced-Fresno or the Fresno-Bakersfield section should be built first. Then we gave you section Appendix C, which was data on how we had applied for the FY10 funding, which incorporated detail about the ARA funding and how we would apply the ARA funding. And Appendix D was a data sheet, showing the 4 segments in some form of a data sheet. And we gave you some information about the bill AB 3040. And finally, we would like the recommendation that the board discuss the selection criteria and then lead to a final set of selection criteria, which we would then use to evaluate the 2 segments that remain today as starter segments and come back to you in a month's time for a final decision. So on page 1 of Appendix A, I will just pull out a few of the main items here. It should be important for you to understand that we have a total of 4.333 billion to construct the line. 4.33 billion is made up of 2.965 billion from federal funding with a state match of 1.962 billion. If you look at footnote 1 of that page, it gives you how the way that this 4.333 billion is made up. That figure excludes any monies that are being used for environmental clearance and upfront engineering on the whole alignment for phase 1. It also excludes the 400 million that is being used by the Transbay Terminal. Again, the FRA requires, as is stated on that page 1, the FRA requires that the rail project using ARA funds be compatible of demonstrating operational independence or independent utility upon completion. I'd like to refer to page 2, top of page 2. We have made mention there to you that the combined federal and state funding is sufficient to provide one operationally independent corridor to meet the FRA requirements. However, additional funding will ultimately be required to fully complete the work necessary to support high-speed train operation and to procure the trains. There is no money at this stage to procure trains. It is also illogical at this stage to buy trains. There is no service possible at this particular stage because there is not a distance possible at this particular stage to start operating a high-speed rail system. High-speed rail builders around the world would first build sufficient miles of high-speed rail infrastructure, and then they would buy the trains. And for many that have shown a lot of interest, the same applies to heavy maintenance facilities. A heavy maintenance facility, although we are busy doing environmental clearance of the land, of the area that we would possibly put these facilities on, the actual heavy maintenance facility is only required when you start delivering trains, and that is still some years off. So you will not find in any of our applications that we have applied for money to buy trains or to build heavy maintenance facilities. We need to build infrastructure first. So getting onto the criteria, if you look at this section, it refers to ARA. ARA has got 2 major criteria that we have to consider. We mentioned them as pass-fail criteria, and they are that the construction must be completed by fall of 2017, and the second is that the project must have an operational independence. Then I go to Proposition 1A. The legislative intent of Proposition 1A, and we've broken that down into 3 points. Number 1, that the entire high-speed train system shall be constructed as quickly as possible in order to maximize ridership and mobility for Californians. Again, please note, it refers to the complete high-speed, the entire high-speed train system. And that must be, and that is our intent. On page 3, that it be completed no later than 2020. And again, that is not in conflict with 2017, because we're talking about a subset of the complete line that needs to be completed by 2020. Item 3, that all phases shall be built in a manner that yields maximum benefit consistent with available resources. Again, as you can see, we have decided with all 3 of those items out of the legislative intent to take them and incorporate them in one of the 4 major criteria which I come to at the end of the presentation. The first 2 criteria, 3, which is more explicit about schedule risks, the second into criteria 3, again because it relates to schedule risk, and the fourth, which covers the aspect of cost benefits and for the section to be constructed. The selection priorities continue according to Code 2704-08F. And I go to point 4, the authority shall give priority to corridors or usable segments thereof that are expected to require the least amount of bond funds as a percentage of the total cost of construction. At this stage, we have funds in the same amount of 4.33 billion of bond funds, of federal funds matched with bond funds are available to either of the two segments that we are considering. We believe that, as it was stated here, it would even have applied for all four segments, but to the two segments in the Central Valley, that it's exactly the same money that would be available to either of the two segments, and therefore this particular item is met equally between those two segments. The project ridership and revenue, the comment here, it's recommended that this priority be incorporated into criteria 1, which is more explicit regarding ridership and regarding the operable high-speed rail system. Again, as we are building a subset of the whole, and as there will not be high-speed ridership at all in none of the four segments until such time as these segments are extended by further segments and the trains are procured, only then will the aspect of maximum ridership really play a role. The need to test and certify trains operating at speeds of 220 miles per hour. FRA safety regulations require that each individual train be certified through extensive testing the maximum top speed. Here again, we believe that part of that may fall into criteria 1. It does not apply today because once again we do not have trains today. We will not have trains when we build this first segment, nor even the second segment. We will not have trains. So we will not be able to test them at 220 miles per hour. However, what is important is that when we do intend to have trains and operate trains on the line, that we have the ability to test these trains and to meet this criteria. And I believe that is what is required by this particular criteria. It relates to how we intend to extend from this initial portion of the line, to extend the line by certain miles and then buy the trains and be in a position to test those trains before they go into operation. The decision by the FRA, the decision by the FRA to choose either of the Central Valley portions obviously makes this point less valuable because in the Central Valley we will be able to test trains at 220 miles per hour. The Central Valley and that portion of the Central Valley was often referred to as the test track, the test alignment. That's also where the heavy maintenance facilities would be, and that would be where finally the trains are coupled and connected and tested and tried. So this particular issue would be more easily resolved now that the Central Valley sections have been chosen by the FRA as being where they want to spend their money. Number 7, the utility of those corridors or usable segments thereof for passenger train services other than high-speed train service that will not result in any unreimbursed operating or maintenance cost to the authority. We believe that this particular clause should be incorporated into criteria 4, which considers the overall benefits and utility of an operable high-speed rail system at the end of the day. As far as the FRA's requirements for independence goes, operable independence goes, it is clear that each one of the 4 segments that we put forward to them, we had to prove to the FRA that an operator could operate on these segments. Also in the Central Valley, the San Joaquin service, if we do not build high-speed if we do not continue to build high-speed rail, the San Joaquin service would operate on that mileage, on those miles that we would build in the valley. So that has been met as far as the FRA requirements is concerned. The extent to which the corridors include facilities contained therein to enhance the connectivity of the high-speed trains network to other modes of transit, including but not limited to conventional rail, intercity rail, commuter rail, light rail, or other rail transit, bus or air transit. Again, we believe that this is an item that falls into the criteria 4, where we would come back to the board and explain to the board what each one of the segments, how each one of these segments would differ, or which segments would have had an advantage in their interoperability with other modes of transportation. Obviously, at this stage, again, this would apply to 2 segments, but we, in that criteria 4, we would come back to the board in a month's time and explain to you where the benefits of those sections are, how they would interoperate with other sections and other modes of transportation. So I go to item number 9. Identify funding source. The identified funding sources are sufficient to complete the corridor or usable segment thereof based on offered funding commitments of private parties and authorizations, allocations, or other assurances received from government agencies. Now this item applies equally to all 4 segments, does not, or the 2 segments that apply, because we are talking about the same money. It does not affect the comparison between the 4 segments or the 2 segments. They all meet operational independence or independent utility with the funds available. I'd like to say again, rest assured, there is another phase, there's another step in this process. We have to put forward to the Department of Finance or the legislature a funding plan. And the funding plan would then indicate to the legislature how this project or a section or a portion of the project would be funded, and that could go beyond this initial arrow-funded section. And we need to put this forward sometime in the year 2011. And in that, we would, together with our business plan, show how we would fund the project and sections of the project as we go forward. Number 10, the corridor or usable segment thereof will be suitable and ready for high-speed train operation when completed. It's again recommended that this be put into criteria 1, which is more explicit regarding ensuring an operable high-speed system as at the lowest installed cost. Once again, none of the 2 segments or the 4 segments would start operating as a high-speed segment. They would be used either as an independent utility by another operator at lower speeds, but finally, of course, the 2 valley segments are both built for 250 miles per hour and for an operation at 220 miles per hour, or design speed of 250 miles an hour and an operation speed of 220 miles an hour. 1 or more passenger service providers can begin using the tracks or stations for passenger train service. Again, we believe that whatever we are building will be used in the same way as required by operational independence and would be covered by the operational independence requirement, which is a criteria B. Planned passenger service by the authority and the corridor usable segment thereof will not require local, state, or federal operating subsidy. Again, we believe that this should go into criteria 1, where we will address this at the next board meeting. Again, as far as the initial investment goes, that is a requirement of the FRA that we bring an operator, and obviously we have at this stage not full commitment, but we have a commitment from Amtrak that they would be operating on that corridor in case of independent utility requirements. We still have to further those discussions with Amtrak, but there is a general letter of agreement that they would operate on that track. The last item, I think, is very clear. It's the same one, that the authority has to complete all the necessary project level environmental clearances necessary to proceed to construction. that is covered in project and time risk or schedule risk, which we've put into criteria 3. So we then go to section C, which in fact is where we have tried to put together these criteria into 4 categories. The first being that logical expansion and evolution of the alignment to ensure an operational high-speed rail system. We believe this is the crux also of Prop 1A, that they very clearly define that we need to ensure that we build a high-speed rail system that will lead to the earliest completion, but also to reach high-speed rail operation. Subsets thereof is to ensure that the first investment forms a core of a statewide 220-mile system that can be logically expanded and extended as additional funding becomes available. Once again, this is the start. The money we're talking about, 4.3 billion, is about 10% of the money we require for the complete project. It is the normal way high-speed rail systems are built anywhere around the world. From this 4.3 billion, we have to give you as a board an indication of how we would thereafter stage the project to ensure that we would end up with a high-speed rail system that would be able to go into operation as soon as possible. And that's what we want to do under point criteria 1, to ensure that we can show to you how we can evolve from the first segment, logically expand and extend as additional funding becomes available. The second is to ensure the earliest startup of a high-speed rail system, as I've just said it before, with the least funds required. And then to consider connectivity of sections, availability of control centers and maintenance facilities, and the phasing of future expansion. Once again, if we had to start building a high-speed rail system, that would not allow us to do the testing of the trains, or would not allow us to have the facilities to maintain the trains, we would finally not be able to operate that system. So the logical expansion of the system is very important for the future success of this particular project. The second criteria is to minimize construction risk, including the right-of-way availability and ability to reach agreement with stakeholders to acquire easement or operating rights. We have to put in place certain MOUs and agreements, even in the early stages, to satisfy also the requirements of the FRA. But at the same time, obviously, that is a possibility of a program risk. So we need to have all our partners sign up. We do have some agreements signed up, as you know, and we continue to ensure that we get such agreements signed up. The least construction complexity, it comes more from the engineering side. You know, we and I are engineers as well, and the complexity of the project is a very important thing to consider, in particular when you start a new project in the United States, as we do not have that, we have not built systems of this magnitude in the United States yet. So the least construction complexity equates to lower cost volatility as well, and the least impacts to existing railroad facilities and operations is also important in our opinion. On the third point is to minimize the schedule risk, and I know that Mr. Derrida has questioned whether the two are not the same. I will get back to that, but the first one, Mr. Derrida, is more related to project risk and cost overrun and technical issues. The first could lead to the second, and you are right on that. But the second are a lot more soft factors that can influence and threaten or slow down a project and could end up in schedule delays. And as this money would not be available to us after 2017, it is important that we take schedule risk as a separate item. That was our opinion. The probability of achieving the rod and knot by the fall of 2011. The ease of construction, again, the effect of the ease of construction on the schedule, not the engineering cost overruns, which we see as being part of number 2, but more the effect of a time overrun. Point 3, possible risk of delay due to litigation. I will discuss that again, as Member Derrida had made comment there too. So I will get to that in a moment. And future construction and equipment procurement sequencing. It is very important in a project of this nature. I know everybody is looking for jobs. This will create a lot of jobs. But projects of this nature also end up in shortages, big shortages. Sometimes projects of this nature result in getting into delays because of not being able to get things in time. So we have to be sure as we go through this next month as well that we can come back to you and give you assurance that the future construction and equipment procurement sequencing will be sufficiently safe so that we will not get into delays because of availability of what we require. I know.
Is it the same with all of them, all the corridors?
Well, there are very different requirements in every one of the corridors. The two, of course, that we talk about at the moment are very similar. But, you know, the type of work that needed to be done, say, on the peninsula or in Anaheim, LA Anaheim, is very different to the type of work that needs to be done in the valley. So the needs are different, and we felt it was necessary to at least consider that we are able to get the availability of staff and materials and equipment to be able to do what we say we're going to do in the time. The fourth, to build the most useful high-speed train infrastructure for the least cost, secure a future high-speed train system for California. So build high-speed train infrastructure that will not result in unreimbursable cost for the authority, unreimbursed cost for the authority, build high-speed train infrastructure that promotes current and future connections to other modes of transport. You can see we carried those forward from the top and we put them and clustered them in the bottom. Builds high-speed train infrastructure that can be expanded to complete the entire high-speed system in an efficient and logical sequence and manner. Builds the most useful segment of high-speed train infrastructure that does not require additional federal or state funding as it is in this particular segment. So we can make what we will tell you that we can build, we will build with the amount of money that we will have available. We believe that these requirements, and if we can work according to those requirements, that we would be able to come back to the board in a month and explain to you the differences between the segments and what the various risks and opportunities are between the various segments, today the two that are remaining, so that a choice can be made by the board which segment would be logically the best to start with to make this a successful project in California. I would like to refer to the email from Member Duridan, in which he had brought up 7 points, and I'd just like to comment to those individual points. Point 1 mentioned that a general note might be included indicating that criteria from the first corridor may not be the criteria for the selected for the follow-on corridors. There was a comment about that this morning by one of the speakers as well. And I would like to say, I accept that there will not be necessarily the identical criteria. Obviously, we still need to meet the law. As the previous speaker told us, we still have to meet the FRA requirements, we still have to meet the legislation of the law of California. But one must understand that once the board selects the first segment that we start with, there is no longer a discussion about error segments. The error segments are no longer error segments because they would now need to be reprioritized in a manner that makes logical sense so that we build a high-speed rail system. And therefore, some of that logic would need to flow into future selection criteria. But obviously the legal criteria remain because they have to be met. The second item, should not a criteria be included in number 1, indicating additional priority for a starter segment that has connectivity to multiple future segments? We believe that our criteria 1, it refers to systems that can be logically expanded and also consider connectivity of sections, that in fact those words and the intent is the same. It is quite clear that we believe that connectivity to multiple future segments is meant by that item. We have to come back to the board and prove to you that from where we start, we will be able to build a high-speed rail system. And I think that is what you were asking in that particular point.
Mr. Chairman, may I
I don't want to interrupt,
What?
he's on a roll, but could we make sure that the minutes of this portion are kept verbatim in order that these comments be commitments? Otherwise, the interpretation of those words would not necessarily be the same by everyone as Roloff has just provided to us. I agree with his comments, by the way. We need to have them in a place where we can trace them.
But if I understand your request, you're requesting that the minutes be verbatim as to just the colloquy that just occurred, or as to the entire testimony?
As to any verbal testimony that would explain what the criteria mean, if the criteria doesn't say that explicitly.
Sure, it's being recorded, so
Yeah,
we
being recorded.
still do that.
All right, that's good.
I have discussed item 3 as I went through the risks. Since both relate to risks, you felt that to consolidate number 2 and number 3 to avoid appearing to overreact to one issue being risk. The reply criteria refers to technical risks, as I mentioned to you before, or construction risks, or more technical of nature, which could affect the costs in particular, and cost overruns. Whereas criteria 2, which addresses more program-related risks, which would affect schedule, and they are often more the soft factors. And for that reason, we believe that these 2 items should be addressed separately. And we feel, as is done normally in project management, these particular items are separately addressed, and that would be our recommendation.
May I follow with the question?
Why don't we do this? Apropos of your earlier suggestion, Commissioner Dearden, why don't we go ahead and let him
I
finish?
can't argue with myself.
Right.
I often do. And then I lose.
Number 4, the mention of potential litigation as a major deterrent seems simplistic. Are we not truly concerned about litigation that cannot be defended rather than just the threat of litigation, which may be spurious and might even have been successfully defended? The simple threat of litigation might be used purely as a delaying tactic if given priority, even though the AG's office is fully capable of successful defending against the threat of litigation if actually pursued. We agree with you there. We say there are 2 forms of litigation, possibly, which we'd like to discuss with the board. The issue of litigation does not only refer to litigation of dissatisfied stakeholders, which, as you correctly said, which could be and has been successfully addressed by the AG's office, but also the possibility of bigger litigation related to environmental issues or legal issues that could come from elsewhere, the EPA or CEQA issues that could come from elsewhere. We would just like to discuss the possibility of litigation, but you're quite correct. It's not just the smaller litigation that will not stop the project. I just want the board to be aware, if we believe that there could be a problem, a big contractual issue or something out of international contracts, that we should bring these to your attention. But you're quite correct, there are 2 types of approaches to this comment. The last word in number 4, item 2, might be changed from transport to public transit, according to Member Derrida, to reinforce the need to use transit. The reply from the authority is we support obviously the use of public transit, very much so, as it's clear from all the studies done by ourselves. However, we need to consider transportation from all modes, being aeroplanes, airlines, bicycles, pedestrians, motor cars, and public transit. So we would like to retain transportation as transit, because we see transit as a very important subset of the transportation requirement. On page 1 of Appendix D, there seems to be an incompatibility. Member Derrida writes the top speed indicates 220 miles per hour for the 2 valley segments. Yet the items above state that the initial work includes electrification, shows for both the valley segments that this is not being done. And yes, Member Derrida, we will make a comment on that page to just be sure that although the segment's built for 220 miles an hour, it will not be operational at 220 miles per hour when built as a standalone sub-segment. So we'll make the comment on the page. On the same page, why is the Merced to Fresno segment identified as having 2 stations, but the Fresno to Bakersfield segment shows only Fresno and not Bakersfield as stations. All the alignments that we've got have got stations. For the independent utility requirement, Amtrak will continue to operate from station to station. All the stations will be there. It was a matter of where would we apply our money? What money is available and how could we best apply our money? In the Merced to Fresno section, we were able to incorporate money for both segments. In the Fresno to Bakersfield segment, we were not able to incorporate both. However, we must also tell the board...
Because of cost.
Pardon?
Because of cost.
Because of cost. No, yeah, because of our application to the FRA. The application to the FRA had limits. So we had to live within the limits that we put up to ourselves. However, we did not receive the exact monies that we would have received from the FRA. So obviously we are now reconsidering how best we can apply this. The FRA requests that from us as well, and we will be having meetings with the FRA in 2 weeks' time, and we will continue this process. And of course, when we come back to the board, we will have more clarity on exactly how that money should be applied, the 4.33 billion that has now been allocated to us by the FRA matched with Prop 1A funds. So I think I've worked through the document. The selection criteria, are finally summarized in Appendix B. Appendix B would be the document that we would use with additional annexures to put forward to the board how we would come to an evaluation of today the two segments that are still in the running. I would just like to reconfirm to everybody here that we must remember that this is a high-speed rail system. This is a system that has to connect Southern California to Northern California. This is not talking, as I know some people are talking, about a segment. This is not a commuter rail line. This is the beginning of a high-speed rail system that connects Southern California to Northern California. And we have to continue building the system, because otherwise we will never meet the criteria of Prop 1A or anybody. It is all part of building a high-speed rail system by 2020 on which high-speed rail trains connect Northern California with Southern California.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Ark. 3 questions with respect to comments made by the commentators, and then 1 other observation. First, there was an issue raised as to whether local money would be considered within the criteria. And it seems to me it is, but I just want to hear you say that it is. I'm looking at 2 different sections. Once where in item number, I believe it's A9, it talks about assurances received from governmental agencies, which would include local governments with respect to funding. Is that correct?
If there were monies available, these would be considered. At present, the monies that have been offered have been monies related to things like heavy maintenance facilities. No decisions have been made on heavy maintenance facilities. But the principle stands. If one of the alignments would be half privately funded, obviously that would have to be considered.
Or funded by a local entity.
Or funded by others, yes.
Okay. Then the second issue is a question raised with respect to property owners, and it looks to me under C, Roman numeral 2, that right-of-way availability does consider property owners, the number of property owners, and whoever those property owners may be. Is that accurate?
That would be the property owners, yes. And
then another question that was raised was with respect to Streets and Highways Code 2704.01 sub G, I think is the citation. And I'm not sure we quite drilled down as to whether we're in compliance with that or not. Whether it's, as I said earlier, whether it's implicit or explicit, we need to make it, I suppose, explicit that we're going to, our criteria are in compliance with all state, federal, and local laws. You want to...
Our criteria have to be according to the local laws. However, as I mentioned before, we need to and will put forward a funding plan during 2011. And the funding plan is required as part of the Prop 1A requirements, in which we will have to put forward to the legislature how we will build a first usable segment according to Prop 1A. And that could be more than what we're talking about here with respect to just the first independent utility section. So we have to have a funding plan for that. And there are other possibilities of adding more fund to the present requirements. So during 2011, we will have to go to the legislature with that, including that funding plan with whatever funds we have at that particular stage.
What we're looking for, or at least what I'm interested in, is your assurance that we will be in compliance with whatever code section that was.
We have to be in compliance, so that means we will be in compliance. We have to be in compliance. But we do not believe that that is just the starter section.
Right.
We will not get the Prop 1A money unless we meet those requirements.
The last comment, and I'm going to preempt Judge Kopp on that, is with respect to how we score litigation, or the threat of litigation.
You preempted me too.
Oh, all right. There's probably a couple of lawyers that want to ask you how you're going to do that, because that's going to be quite a challenge. The death and taxes and litigation, I think, are all things that are inevitable. So how do we do that? I mean, how do we decide what litigation is potentially going to be an obstacle versus frivolous litigation? Anyway, my concern is that if we do, I think it's pointed out by Commissioner Dearden, spend much time, or you spend much time sort of parsing through that may not be as useful a criteria as indicated.
Could I just add on to?
Commissioner Schenk wants to
Just to add on, that Ms. Alexis brought up the issue that is not an appropriate criteria at all. So if you would comment on that.
Okay. Did you want to comment on the same thing? Okay. We're going to pile on.
Well,
answer all of this at once.
It's a net. Because maybe it doesn't belong as a criteria based on experience. There's never been a preliminary injunction sought in any of these 4 lawsuits. Never been one issued. Maybe instead of litigation, you change it to court order, or maybe you just delete it. I don't see a history of having been delayed by litigation.
Mr. Chairman?
Could
I pile on a little bit too? As you noticed, it was the one I wrote the most about in my issue. My fear, Roloff, is that if we put that in there, it becomes a kind of a red flag for folks and invites them to use litigation as a delaying factor, as has occurred already. And we don't care if we're sued. I've got some books that I'm going to pass out to the board about the Golden Gate Bridge that had almost 2,500 lawsuits against it at one time. And we don't, if the lawsuit against us is spurious or has no merit, that's not our problem. But it's the lawsuits that George can't defend against that we're concerned about. And so I don't know how you, maybe you use the word that Quentin mentioned there, court order or something about a stop or something like that.
You're talking about the injunction court order, I believe.
Mr. Chairman, if I may say something, I mean, the topic was put on there, we put it on. It's not uncommon in international contracts, let's put it that way, that one considers this as a criteria, but there are contracts worldwide, big contracts worldwide, where sometimes contracts are stopped because of, but those are international big issues that come up that finally result in a project being put on hold. So, we were not really talking about what you're talking about, the kind of smaller litigation that we're seeing at the moment. And I tend to agree with you, and maybe because we are local here, it may not be an issue but we thought it was an issue we should talk to the board about.
Well, I think the sense of the board is that we eliminate that as a criteria.
Yes.
Without objection, maybe we should eliminate that as a criteria for all the reasons that have been indicated. All right. Any other comments, questions?
I do have
Good.
several.
We start.
I'll wait my
Commissioner Flores.
I have a question with regard to when the December meeting. How soon would we have the information? I mean, 10 days before the meeting, 5 days? Do we have any idea at this point?
I can, we try and get it to you 10 days before meetings. We try, sorry. Yes, we're going to try and get it to you 10 days before.
That's on record, right?
But the minutes show.
Let's do this. Let's go around the horn here. So we'll start with Commissioner Flores.
I'm good. I just wanted to just know how soon we would have it. Thank you.
It's right down here on the recorder. Commissioner Kopp?
I want to nail down that 2704.01G, the usable segment definition. It seemed to me easy to simply write it in with one of it. What do you think is the closest to covering that role?
We believe, Member Cox, we believe that it is, that the requirement is to present a plan to be able to build a usable segment. We have to supply and submit a plan next year to the legislature how we are going to build a usable segment. And it, in our opinion, is not the identical thing to what we need at the moment, and that is how do we do the first portion of this plan of a usable segment. And that's the independent utility.
Maybe I should solicit a legal opinion. I think it's implied and that there isn't any vulnerability if it's not mentioned in the criteria and later there's a challenge to a decision by the board.
Judge Cox, George Spanos, Deputy Attorney General. In response to your question, let me approach it a little differently. Of the $9.5 billion, a 7.5% portion can be spent for certain designated purposes, as spelled out in Section 2704.08 Subdivision G, including but not limited to such things as environmental studies, planning, preliminary engineering, acquisition of interest in real property and right-of-way, and relocation assistance and other things. That's one pot of money. The other 92.5% is subject to subdivision C of that code section, which talks about a funding plan that you have to submit to the legislature when you're submitting your request for an initial appropriation for a corridor or usable segment. I underscore the word initial because I think what is contemplated and what was contemplated was that a particular corridor or usable segment, as defined in the law, would not receive all of its funding and be constructed all at once. It might take several years. So you may come back for you may make subsequent requests for funding. But it's when you make the initial request for funding, or if there is a material change later on, you're also required to submit that information to the legislature. But it's that initial request that triggers the requirement that you prepare a funding plan under subdivision C of 2704.08. That, incidentally, is the funding plan that the law requires you submit to the peer review group at least 60 days before you make your request for an initial appropriation to the legislature. And that funding plan has to contemplate what it's going to take to complete that corridor or usable segment. But again, it's not necessary that you're going to actually be asking for enough money to complete it all, but that you will be saying initially, well, this is our plan. It may take, I don't know, 5 years, whatever, but initially this is what we need. But that's going to be part of a funding plan that contemplates eventual completion. It goes to the peer review group. The peer review group in 60 days reports to the legislature. The legislature presumably appropriates the money, and then before you can commit the money, you will have to prepare another funding plan that is described in subdivision D, as in David, in that same code section, which you submit to the Director of Finance and to, I believe, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, and then the Director of Finance has to approve that funding plan before you can actually commit the money. So that's the process, and I wanted to give you that context because I think it helps clarify what Director Van Ark is saying, that you're not doing this all at once. Now,
I'm satisfied.
Okay.
The other question I had, Tom, was related to one of Brad's suggestions on Roman numeral 4 and the use of the word transport. Mr. Van Ark, the use of the word transport, you include airports in that formulation?
Yes, airports, I said the air traffic.
All right, thank you. Okay. Mr. Shane?
Yeah, a couple of things, Mr. Van Ark. First, again, just for the record, does section C, was that scrubbed against section B? In other words, what is statutorily required, we know, and then we have these additional illuminating suggestions and priorities. I just want to make sure that council or somebody appropriate made sure that there was a meshing here.
Council was involved. Obviously, the work was mainly started off by the team, but the AG's office has been involved in the process as well. And we have had, and that's why Mr. Spanos is up to date about the differences between the Prop 1A requirements and the ARA requirements. I mean, it's clear that when Prop 1A was voted and the bill was written, at that stage there was still no talk of stimulus funding. So it is an area that we have to constantly be comparing, and the AG's office is working with us on those comparisons.
Okay. Second question on selection priorities, number 5, projected ridership and revenue. Could you just expand on that a little bit? Are we supposed to be looking at the ridership revenue for these initial sections and comparing them? Oh, thank you. I thought my voice would project more. If you would just explain that a little bit more to me, please.
It looks to me like the bill was written, and it's clear, I mean, the bill was written at a time when somebody was hopeful that there would be a section built, or maybe 2 optional sections available, in which you would put a high-speed rail line. And then you should take, or give priority to that high-speed rail section that's got the highest ridership.
Mm-hmm.
The issue today is we've got 4 ARA segments, and now down to 2, but even the 4 we had, none of them have got a high-speed rail operating on them. So at this particular stage, that is not an applicable criteria at all.
Right, that's what it seemed to me, so it was, okay. Finally, this letter that was just handed out to us, was that a surprise to you? I'm surprised to me.
Well, it was a surprise to me. I must be honest with you, we did ask the administrator when we saw him on Thursday of last week when he made the announcement. It was clear to us that the $715 million was allocated to the Central Valley. So the FY10 funds were allocated to the Central Valley. That letter was clear. What was not clear to us was, did that mean that the balance of the money, or the previous request match was $3.3 billion, could be applied to the other 2 segments or not? And then we got this letter. So it is, it is a surprise. Is it a total surprise after the letter we got last Thursday, which already indicated the valley?
Yeah.
I think it is a clarification letter more than anything else. The other one would have ended up in, many questions being asked. What do you mean would the arrow funds still be applicable available to the other areas? So I think it's a clarification letter. And after last Thursday's statement, I think I was not that much surprised in that.
So in practical terms, we are narrowed in our decision here to 2 options in the Central Valley.
Right.
Thank you.
Mr. Crane?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question back to this local contribution issue. So do I understand correctly, we are not considering as an element in this decision whether or not a local jurisdiction has skin in the game, whether they've anteed up some money. So if one of these jurisdictions, one of these segments says, we'll give you $100 million to help us along, that wouldn't give them a leg up?
I think, Member Craig, no, we're not saying that. The law is the law and we will work accordingly. I think we must just be careful of it. At the moment, we have got $4.333 billion. If somebody gave me $100 tomorrow and said that's my contribution, that cannot be the reason why that segment is going to get the project. So, I think that's, as far as
separate to the extent that it reduces the state's contribution.
It does.
Theoretically,
if you want to read the law, it does. But that is, I don't believe the intent. With $100.
Yeah, but don't use my $100. I'm talking. Don't use that figure. What I'm asking is this: if a local jurisdiction anteed up some money so that the state's contribution therefore could be lower, then that's one of the criteria here.
One of the criteria would have to be
the lowest state contribution.
Sure.
Thank you.
Isn't that the very last?
Well, I think it's in both item number 9 as well as the last sentence of
it's
Roman
in
numeral 4. But
we got so many Roman numerals and numbers here. I don't know which
I
one you're
know.
referring to.
on page 4,
I got it.
item number 9, where it talks about identify funding sources are sufficient to complete the corridor, and it lists private parties, authorizations, and assurances received from governmental agencies. I assume that means local governmental agencies.
Local agencies.
Right.
But that doesn't go to my issue of which one somebody should get a leg up if they're reducing the state's contribution.
Right.
Is that covered? Where do I look for that?
Look at the last spot. And then under Roman numeral 4, where it says builds the most useful segment of high-speed transport infrastructure. You see that? So in other words, if somebody comes up with $100 million, that reduces state and federal funding. So it should
I don't want it to reduce federal funding.
No. State, well,
federal. I want it to reduce state funding. I want somebody to get the benefit for reducing what we have to put up, so that we have more money left over for other things.
It would be state. Both of them would go back because our ratio with the federal government is locked.
It says federal or state funding.
So I'm sorry, excuse me. So clarify that for me. You mean if a local jurisdiction, if we're locked with the federal government on a 50-50 or 70-30, and we get money contributed by a local jurisdiction, we have to split the benefit of that with the federal government? No. They don't look at the state separately from the local jurisdiction?
I'm not sure whether we would have to interpret that.
I want us to get 100% of the benefit of what the locals put out. That's what I want.
But remember, Craig, I think the issue is the following. The federal government have...
I got 3 people talking. Can I get one person to answer?
The federal government has given us a value. You are talking about the possibility of reducing the burden on the state.
Correct.
Sorry, I'm the project manager here. I would obviously like to have as much money as possible, so maybe I see the extra 100 million being another 100 million to extend the size of the project. But we could most probably reduce the state's participation by that 100 million.
But there's something wrong here then. We know the cost of the segment.
Yes.
So you're telling me if we have 2 segments that cost the exact same amount, and the federal government is giving us the same money for each, and the state right now has to contribute the same for each, if one of them steps up and says, we'll defray, stop using $100, we'll defray
$100 million.
$500 million worth of your cost, because we're gonna go out and do transit or whatever, we got a bunch of people willing to put up some money. That wouldn't give them a leg up in our determination of which one of those we pick?
I've said that we'll give them a leg up. The only difference I think we've got is I would like to retain that $500 million to build more alignment.
But that's my point. By reducing the amount that the state has to put up, you
No,
have $500 million.
I'd like the state's money and the $500 million so that...
You're like our legislature.
Yeah, so I think if there are two segments, or there are four segments competing, if one segment produces 100 or whatever, $500 million, that segment is given a higher score with respect to funding. But it doesn't necessarily mean, I think is what you're saying, that reduces the state funding necessarily, nor the federal funding, right?
I would prefer to build more.
Okay, then
You
that
see, the
doesn't
flexibility of the build is there. We need state, we need local funding.
I feel like I'm in a Monty Python film right now. We have to clarify this point, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Let's stipulate that you would like more money. Okay. What we're talking about here is a competition that we have among four segments.
Yes.
Really two segments. And what you're telling me right now is that if one of those segments comes out and says, here's some money, you, the state, instead of having to put up $2 billion, only have to put up $1.9 billion for our segment, because we're going to put 100. You're saying that would not give them a leg up?
No, I said it would give them a leg up. They would have an advantage in it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Did everybody already understand that before?
No further questions? I didn't mean to cut you off, Commissioner Craig.
No, you cut me off. Everybody else had it.
Commissioner Deere.
I guess ultimately, the conclusion to that issue would have to be the board. We'd have to decide, are we going to take less state money, or are we going to add the additional match to the total, and then run out of state money for match sooner? And that's a tactical decision the board.
I think the concern that we'll have too much money will cost that.
Yeah, that's something I'd love to have.
Let me ask a couple of questions if I could, Tom. The reason why I was concerned about having two sections on risk, rule off item 2 and 3, is because apparently there's a weighting system in the scoring process that relates to each one of the Roman numeral sections. And by having two sections on risk, you double weight the risk issue. And that's why I was concerned. Looking down, it's not a big issue, we can leave it there. But looking down under item number 3, the ease of construction reduces probability of delay. Well, that's really a construction risk. It's misplaced under item number 3. The second, the last item, future construction and equipment procurement sequences, that's a construction issue. It really ought to be up under item number 2. So you really have only one item under Roman numeral 3 that relates to the AHSRA criteria and issues, and it's not an insignificant item. The rod and nod issue is very, very significant. But I'm not sure that you need to have double weighting for risk, and I'll leave that. It's just a personal thing. Item number 2, in my comments, you've already answered, and that's in regard to the local, you've answered it several times, local fiscal support. And I think that's one that we want to promote. I think if we get a little competition between the two segments and we can get a couple of $100 million more, that's just fine. Item number 3 in my issues was the two-station issue. You commented on that, but I didn't understand. I think you're talking about phasing two stations. But the criteria really says that the section selected for the starter segment should have two stations. And only one of the Valley Corridor segments has two stations included in the proposal as we've seen it now.
We do not believe that. We believe that the requirement of usable segments where the two stations is mentioned will be addressed when we do the funding plan, where we will define how we will build a usable segment. A usable segment will be more than what we are building in this first subset. The usable segment is beyond that. And then we will have more stations in all of them.
Okay. I think that's one that's open. We need to think about that. My next item was in regard to the issue that is one word issue, but it's under item number 4, and it's use of the word transport. Everything we've done from this board has been to promote mass transportation, not automobiles. And when you use the word transport, it suggests that we're promoting, and I've heard this from our engineers too, and it scares the dickens out of the local cities with stations. We're promoting the creation of huge parking garages that's going to encourage people to drive their cars to the high-speed rail stations. I don't like that at all. I think it's directly contrary to the governor's intent of trying to create a green community, a green state, and I think it's contrary to our objectives and our commitments to the environmental community that has helped us very much in promoting this project. I do not like the word transport. I think transit or mass transportation is what we mean there. And we're encouraging communities to create transit feeder and distribution systems. And that includes airports. And I do not like the word transport because it seems to promote cars. And if I'm given a vote, I'll vote against that.
Well, let's let Mr. Van Ark answer that, and Commissioner Cobb.
Yeah, maybe just simplify.
Member Dearden, let me take responsibility. That was my word that I put in there, and it's both long-term public support.
We can't fire you because you're late.
And is there an issue with substituting public transit for transport?
Let me give you my rationale for it. You know, particularly in the east, we're seeing huge increases in use of private bus companies to supply to stations, to actually to compete to as well.
Instead of public transportation, it's transit.
Oh, transit. Okay, and then the other thought that I had is my vision of this, and it's maybe me, is electric car parks where you have chargeable stations where the electric cars come here. I wanted to promote all passengers coming in to build as much passenger traffic as possible for high-speed rail. So that was my thinking in using transport rather than public or transit.
Commissioner Cobb.
May I propose to add the words including public transit after the word transport?
And you want to drop the word transport.
Commissioner Dearden wants it out.
He wants it out.
Well, I'm one vote.
I don't want it out.
All right.
As transport includes air and.
It includes the airlines as well. I mean, we have airport connectors and things like that.
Transit, in my way of thinking, is airports, and we can say transit in airports. But I don't want to suggest promoting the use of automobiles to come to high-speed trains.
Well, in a moment, we're gonna vote on how this language is gonna go. Commissioner Crane.
Yeah, I don't agree with Commissioner Dearden. We have to think about this as a business. We need ridership.
That's what
I have no idea what kind of cars are going to end up there, and I doubt that most local jurisdictions are going to build large car brands anyway, but that'll be up to them if SB 375 lets them do that sort of thing in California anymore. But we have a business to build here. We need as much ridership as possible. We need people to be able to get there any way they possibly can, and I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. So I like Quentin's idea, transport, including public transportation. I don't want to get rid of, I don't want to narrow it.
All right, well,
I'll move that addition.
All right, Commissioner Cobb moves an amendment to the selection criteria, substituting the words transport with the words transport and public transit. Is that correct?
Comma, including public transportation.
Comma, including public transportation. All right. Let's vote on the amendment first.
Could I ask Q a question? How about instead of public, how about mass transportation? Because there are private mass transportation systems.
Sure.
And
mass transportation.
to be collegial, I'll hold my nose and vote for this.
All right.
You don't have to.
So, Commissioner Cobb, you want to give me the language so that we have it correct?
Including mass transportation.
Okay, transport, comma, including mass transportation. Correct? All right. Without objection, that'll be included in the selection criteria. Any objection? Hearing no objection, all right, that'll be included. Now,
one more question.
Yes.
And this is a general one, not so much on this, but going back to Fran's issue. I think we've been knocked appropriately for not getting information to the public in time for the public to review it before we take action. Her request for 10 days is minimum. Any board of supervisors, any public body has to have it out 7 days in advance.
Except the legislature, but go ahead.
Well, that's not laudatory. But we're taking action with a lot of interest. If it isn't on our webpage 7 days in advance, I don't think we ought to take action on it. And Rulon ought to know that, and he ought to make sure that his staff performs that.
All right, your comment is noted. I think without further comment, let's make sure that we've captured the intent of the board. As I understand it, we're going to eliminate litigation or threat of litigation as a selection criteria. And what other amendments, Commissioner Kopp?
I just have one word that there's maybe under Roman numeral 2, the word stakeholders. You're talking about right of way and easements. Isn't the better word owners? Stakeholders is, I don't know if a stakeholder is an owner or not, but I know
Could be a lessee.
as an owner.
Could be a long-term lessee.
I suggest replacing that with the word owners.
As Commissioner Shane points out, though, it could be a tenant, lessee,
A long-term
as
lessee.
opposed to the owner.
It could be the freight folks.
Could be the operator.
Right.
The operator in some instances, you know.
So you're okay with stakeholders? All right. All right, any other amendments to the selection criteria before we vote? All right.
Move adoption of the correction of the criteria as modified.
All right, Commissioner, sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Commissioner Kopp moves as amended,
And Crane seconds.
and Commissioner Crane seconds. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Could I ask
Oh, I'm
a
sorry.
question? Was the intent then to move the two issues that seem to be miscategorized up into, it doesn't matter, it's a language. We know what we're doing.
Speak for yourself.
Madam Secretary?
Mr. Humber?
Aye.
Mr. Crane?
Aye.
Mr. Girardon?
Aye.
Ms. Flores?
Aye.
Mr. Kopp?
Aye.
Ms. Shea?
Aye.
All right, well, we concluded that segment. Now, as to item number 4, before we lose a member here, can I ask how long the presentation is on item number 4?
How long? You said how long?
How long is the presentation on item number 4? Yes.
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
2 weeks.
All right.
Less than that.
Less than that. Less than 20 minutes. All right. We're gonna go ahead. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take the presentation. Then we've got a number of folks that want to make public comment. Then we'll move to public comments after the presentation.
Right. But he and I had a conversation.
On this item number 4.
He wants to know more than that. That's when we decided that he wants to roll on.
Go ahead.
Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, this is brought forward because there's been a unique confluence of issues that have allowed us to reconsider something that had previously been precluded. We have new information. Of course, we're in an evolving design requirement, but we have new information from an additional agency. We have furthered the design in the environmental studies, and we identified a possible additional option for consideration. This is very unique, and the circumstances are such that it's actually beneficial in multiple ways. What we're recommending is to add to the supplemental AA consideration at Redwood City of an option to look at a trench and do an evaluation. The reason we're suggesting that is because, first of all, Caltrain Engineering Department has agreed to consider a variance for the standard gradient, and that is a significance as far as the approach to the Redwood City Station. Also, what we have found is by doing an evaluation of that criteria, of what was previously perceived to be a major impact to a major crossing called Whipple Road, actually turns out to be rather minor. And in effect, we would have to raise the road only by about 3 feet. The benefit of that is that there's no ancillary effect on the surrounding community. It has minimal effect on property. It has virtually no impact on the environment. What that allows us to do is minimize impact to property ownership and minimize impact to the right-of-way. So in effect, the reconsideration stands pretty much on its own. We did a subsequent review of the design requirements with the city The city has agreed, where they previously had not, that modification of Whipple Road is an acceptable change to them. It does also require that we look at a Cordelialis Creek, sorry about that, where there is a current creek crossing in a box culvert, and we would have to move that approximately 300 feet. Since it's already in a box culvert, that means the engineering is rather straightforward. So we consider this criteria to be basically non-invasive to the community and quite feasible. We're recommending that we reconsider a trench option through the city of Redwood City. We feel that it is a valid comparative alternative to the current configuration of aerial structure only, and that it should be considered by you for inclusion in the supplemental AA. I should also suggest to you that we have been notified by the airport at San Francisco that what had previously been offered to us for consideration as a maintenance facility at San Francisco Airport and was withdrawn at one point in time for consideration has now re-entered, and they are willing to discuss this with us. So we'd also like to suggest to you that that be brought into consideration for the next level.
For those when?
I'm sorry?
Brought into consideration.
This will be all included in as we migrate the design through the 15% design process and on into the draft environmental process.
This would be for a layover or for maintenance, heavy maintenance?
This is the storage yard and the light maintenance that is only right now considered at the city of Brisbane. This allows us an alternative to the city of Brisbane to be considered.
All right.
Mr. Chairman.
Why don't we just, are you finished with your presentation?
That's it.
All right. Commissioner Cox.
Well, the item you're asked to add now is just the alternative.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, there's notification.
Other questions? All right, hearing no, Commissioner Jordan, did you have a question?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's directly on this, but I'd like to make a comment relating to this segment and others as it relates to parking policy. And whenever it's appropriate.
Why don't we do that under commission reports? All right. Seeing that there's no comment, why don't we go ahead and take public comment? Same suggestion as before, limit the comments to 2 minutes and be cognizant of those who have commented before you so that we don't repeat ourselves. First, we have Mr. Jerry Carlson, and followed by Mr. Maida.
Good afternoon. I'm Jerry Carlson, a councilman from the town of Atherton. Thank you for reconsidering the alignment option for Redwood City, adding back the trench. It was said that it was non-invasive, would minimize impact to property owners. There are other communities that would ask for the same option. Atherton and other peninsula cities ask you to consider underground options such as tunneling and trench be added back into the AA considerations. The freight trains have been one reason why the tunneling option has been scratched. It seems to me that you ought to be considering electrifying the freight locomotives as being part of the broader look at this whole picture. It's being done in Europe and elsewhere, and it would certainly eliminate an artificial constraint that exists currently. We are very concerned about the EIR being issued without the other options, underground options being considered. This is a chance to show these communities a way that they could buy into the high-speed rail project. The benefit of the high-speed rail project so far in the peninsula is to have been effectively devaluing our properties. It's harder to sell property now. It causes uncertainty with the banks as to how to appraise the property. The value of properties have declined as a result of the fact that high-speed rails announced their intentions to build along the peninsula border. In my recent successful election, all the people I talked to were against any kind of an aerial structure or above ground option being considered on the peninsula. So I urge you to take a broader view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Carlson. Next, Mr. Maida, to be followed by Mr. Bigelow. Mr. Maida, I assume you just want to adopt Mr. Clement's comments.
For the most part, yes.
Okay.
So on behalf of the cities of Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and Atherton, I will adopt actually all of the comments from Councilmember Carlson. However, I would like to add as well that the other two cities would also like the consideration of cut and cover for those cities, because we believe that if we can look at that alternative for Redwood City, the same and similar conditions exist in these three cities, and that we should put that back on the plan. We also ask that, as Member Crane has indicated at today's meeting, that the ridership is in fact very critical to the outcome of success of high-speed rail. And since our ridership study, we believe, is still inadequate, it's going to have considerable implications on the number of trains per hour. It's going to have a consideration on grade separations, whether they're needed or not needed, how many high-speed rail tracks will have to be built, and ultimately the success and failure of the high-speed train system. Finally, I'd like to add that we would ask that the DEIR and EIS be delayed until after December. Because there's just a lot of work to do and a lot of issues, and we've requested this in the past. We've never received a response from the authority for other requests. This time we'd at least like to get a response, yes or no, so we can try to make some decisions on what we should be doing within our cities. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. May. Thank you. Next we have Mr. Jim Bigelow.
Okay. Good afternoon. Jim Bigelow with the Redwood City San Mateo County Chamber. We'd like to support the staff recommendation on adding in the trench study for Redwood City. Redwood City has spent a significant amount of time with the downtown precise plan, which really is favorable to the possibility of a high-speed station, and which is under discussion at the council and the community level without a result at this time. So, and it would give the ability to see how an aerial and the trench would fit into the higher density planning of the downtown area. And before I leave, just on item 3, just as a mind teaser, Caltrain electrification is $1.5 billion from San Francisco to San Jose. The 3 counties, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, over a period of Resolution 3434, we have about $750 million for the electrification for Caltrain. We are short half. If there's a partnership between high-speed rail and Caltrain, if this project goes ahead, that's how you can do some cost sharing in a time where you are short on funds. And I agree with Mr. Van Ark, the tin cup needs to rattle often and loud, because this project is going to take a lot of money to complete. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bigelow.
Mr. Brownrigg, followed by Mr. Schönbrunn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Van Ark, for coming and visiting the cities of Millbrae, Burlingame, and San Mateo. I'm a recently elected city council person in Burlingame. My background is business and finance, so I'm taking a day off of work to be here. As a newbie, I didn't realize that I should offer to comment on the first part of the agenda and have everybody in the audience. So, yet another lesson learned in a year of them. I'm here because I'm representing hundreds of Burlingame voters who are deeply concerned. You know the story. I would hope that I can move beyond that. But what I'm here to do, and to bring a letter from our city council that Mr. Van Ark has also received, is to request for common sense, for comedy, and frankly for good old political strength to re-include in the EIR that you're considering for the peninsula, a covered trench and tunnel for our segment. It is clearly the superior environmental alternative. It may fail for other reasons, but on an environmental grounds, which is what CEQA is all about, it is clearly better. It is less noisy, it is less visible, it is less smelly, it is less obtrusive, it damages property values. In our estimation, the people who live there, less than an aerial elevated freeway through Burlingame. To somehow drop that alternative strikes us as inconceivable and conceivably raising a risk of litigation. And I understand that you guys can't focus on litigation, but why invite it? The letter says the same thing, but we urge you to reinsert it. And I would just point out that as board members, and I've sat on many corporate boards, it's difficult because you rely on management to provide the information that you need. And management's doing its best job, putting out fires and doing a bunch of other things, but management doesn't always have the right data. That's why you should let the process play out. So, for example, Mr. Van Ark had the impression that you could only cover a part of the trench because of ventilation issues. As soon as he said so in public, the freight industry all vigorously denied that. So I would simply point out that let the data play out, include the alternative for all of our sakes. Very briefly, I'm not going to talk about segments because it looks like you're going to focus on the Central Valley. Good for you. I would suggest that with the financial analysis that you're going to have, that you're going to spend $750,000 to $2.5 million on, this is coming from the investment world. You have buy side, you have sell side, right? This is clearly a sell side document. It's all designed for investors. There really needs to be a buy side analysis. And what you might do, what you might consider do, I humbly would suggest, is putting this back to the voters a year from now with that analysis in place, with a lot more data in front of you from the work that's being done by Mr. Van Ark and his team, and ask the voters what they think with that analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Schoenberg.
David Schoenbrunn, Transdev. I wanted to comment on how appalled I was by recent comments by the authority that we can't have a tunnel in the mid-peninsula area there because of freight. And the problem that I saw with that statement is just exactly how locked into place it is with the restrictions of the Caltrain MOU. It's very clear to us that the Caltrain MOU is preventing creative solutions of issues on the peninsula. And so in reference to tunnels, the most obvious possible solution is leave freight trains on the surface. That means you don't have to deal with grade separations. But because your design guidelines are requiring you to move forward with 4 tracks that are grade separated and unified, your ability to be creative is dramatically limited. This means you don't end up with good solutions. And I believe your problems on the peninsula start with a flawed MOU that is far too restrictive and is not of benefit to the state. It might possibly be of benefit to Caltrain, but that's a different issue. And I believe you are far too constrained by that MOU. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions with respect to item number 4? Comments?
I would move the adoption of the staff recommendation.
Second. Commissioner Dearden seconds. All righty. Madam Secretary, if you call the roll.
Mr. Umber?
Aye.
Mr. Dearden?
Aye.
Ms. Flores?
Aye.
Mr. Pop?
Aye.
And Ms. Shea?
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move to the CEO report.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'd just like to give a brief report and make sure you're aware of some changes in our organization as well. Sitting with me earlier on was Mr. Cliff Peavy, who you know was standing in as interim program manager for our authority's PMT team. It was interim. Cliff Peavy is Executive Vice President of Parsons Brinckerhoff for the East Coast region, so he has a lot of other things to do, and he's going to go and return and do that, but he will stay with us as a part of the peer review panel of the project So he will still be involved. He knows this type of business. I'm glad he will still be indirectly involved. But I would like to mention that he is here with us, and I'd like to welcome Major General Hans van Winkel, who, as of the beginning of this week, has become the Program Director for the PMT team. Hans is a veteran of international infrastructure projects. He is Vice President and Senior Engineer at Parsons Brinckerhoff. As a Major General in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, he developed and organized and deployed strategies around the world for infrastructure reconstruction projects. He also directed the Corps' National Civil Works Program, which had more than a $5 million per annum budget, overseeing successful execution of more than 500 domestic projects. Hans has a BSc Engineering from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and he's MPP in Public Policy from the University of California, Berkeley. And I would really like to welcome Hans, if you want to stand up, Hans, and everybody knows who he is. I'm glad to have him on the team and the leader of the team. I wanted to take this opportunity to make sure people are aware that we continuously are improving our team, and we're getting ourselves ready to build this project. I'd like to say a few things. Personal outreach continues, meetings on the peninsula. You heard some of the people commenting about them today. Generally a lot of support, I must say, for the project, and wherever I go, the support, even though sometimes there are comments and people that are concerned, but the support stays overwhelmingly positive. On the MOU side, you heard about the San Jose MOU. I think great things have been done. I also would like to thank the San Jose staff and the council for working together with us. I think that's been a very positive move. We had some good meetings with Spur, very supportive as well. We met in Southern California with all the CEOs of the transportation agencies a few times, as well as with the City Council of San Francisco, who too are very supportive of the project. Our relationship with the UP Railroad, as I've often said in this meeting, continues in a constructive manner. We are continuing with constructive discussions, and I will continue having such constructive discussions, and I would like to clear the air. Often there were statements made about the relationship between the freight railroads and the High-Speed Rail Authority. I understand, we have an understanding for their cautiousness and concern for safety, but at the same time I do understand, and we do work together, and we are advancing discussions and working positively in the right direction. We presented at the Assembly Select Committee for High-Speed Rail, which was held during the month, together with the Belgian delegation, and Member Derrida and myself were there, and we did a presentation there. I must also say there's a tremendous interest at this stage building up from contractors. We've had quite a few delegations of contractors, including international contractors forming consortia. We're trying to find a way to form consortia to be able to work with us on the future of this project, and it's showing the right direction. We've had various delegations from the Central Valley on the issue of the heavy maintenance facility. I think I was happy to hear today that we were able to ensure that they understand the procedure. It will take some time for us to build a heavy maintenance facility. It's not part of the first tranche of monies, and I think they're starting to understand that. I understand, and they're all interested to have it, but they are understanding that this is still going to take a while before that decision is finally made. There were some conferences that we attended, thinking outside the tracks in Fresno, where I can only say that people are highly excited about high-speed rail. I think we had about 700-800 people there. The theme was high-speed rail. It was all about high-speed rail, including videos about high-speed rail. The people are highly enthused about the future of California and the future mobility of the state. Also in Southern California, Mobility 21 in Anaheim was a highly successful, more local, but also driven to a great extent by high-speed topics and ideas. A very, very good get-together of the industry. We had a very successful meeting with the regional administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency here of the Western region and his staff. And I think things are working well as we develop our project together and we move forward together. Obviously, we've had many authority normal outreach meetings this month again, in total 84 meetings, technical working group meetings, policy and staff working group meetings, and general outreach meetings, of which there were 40 in Northern, Central, and Southern California. The meetings continue. We are trying to communicate. We will continue to communicate. We will not give up. So we are going to continue communicating with everybody outside there. A few more items. 6-month audit report. The response was sent in on October the 12th. And we believe that we have a very close agreement with the BSA, the auditor, on what we have achieved, and they have accepted generally that 9 of the 10 findings there, full consensus with us, and the 10th one they felt that we still needed to do a bit more on the PMT reporting. This is being implemented at this stage. They feel we have partially responded, but we need to ensure that we have better oversight of the status of the deliverables. So we are busy improving that. Regarding the Inspector General's review, although criticized in the press, we do not believe the IG's report was as such negative. It is often, for those who want to see the glass half full rather than half empty, the report was in itself a positive report for an agency that has been in flux and is moving forward to prepare itself for the implementation of this project. The 3 issues that were criticized were correctly criticized. I do not disagree. There were monies paid without sufficient supporting documentation. Do not forget this was in the period between April and June of this year, because their check was done up to June of 2010, and it was not after that period of time. The other thing is that there was 90,000 paid for outreach through our PMT contract. Unfortunately, these things happen when you change one contract from one supplier to another, and this has been corrected from July the 1st. And there is an issue that a contract was placed for with the aim to meet the requirements of local stakeholders, of local COGS, to give them more insight, to give them more opportunities to understand the work that we were doing. There was surely an incorrect decision made to fund 700,000 through a mechanism within the organization through consultants, which did not give a solid line reporting and oversight possibility. The intent was 100% correct. It was the thing done earlier in the year, but obviously the way you run contracts is not always correct. That was not correct, the way the contract was placed. I can state that none of these errors resulted in a loss of money for the state. Furthermore, the IG congratulated the authority and his contract manager on renegotiating contracts which brought a saving of 2.6 million to the authority. And again, the authority is satisfied with the audit. We should not forget, this audit was done on our request. It was not an audit that somebody pushed from the outside. We requested the audit be done on ourselves to see how well prepared we could be for the future. The fiscal year budget of the authority, the budget has obviously finally been passed, 100 days late. Some of the problems remain. Unfortunately, the budgets, the trailer bill did not pass, the transportation trailer bill did not pass, not because of anything related to high-speed rail, but for completely other reasons. The problem being that we are still not able to hire our exempt staff because those 6 exempt staff were part of that tradable. We have now the authority through you today, and because of the budget being approved, to hire a financial consultant. And as you know, these aspects have an effect on the reporting that we can do and are able to do in the future. And we have advised the legislature that we will not be able to supply a business plan by February the 1st, as we have had more than 100 days of delay from their side to get financial consultants on board and or hire staff on our side. But we will work with the legislature to ensure that new report will come out, and we will make sure that that they do get a report, because it's part of normal business practice to get a business plan, to get an updated business plan. We will just have to agree on a new date. So we're working with the legislature on that, and we will come back to you on what our recommendation is. The other bills, I think most of you know by now, AB 289, Galgiani was vetoed. The Blumenfield bill was vetoed. 619, AB 619, SB 409, Cheney was vetoed. SB 455, Lowenthal was vetoed. And SB 964 was vetoed. So in fact, there were no real bills that affected us that moved forward in the last session. These were basically all vetoed. The one that, of course, also carried the 6 exempts was the Galgiani bill, but it was tied together with the Cheney bill, and therefore, as the two were tied, the governor decided he could not let one of the two go, so they were both vetoed. Again, I would just like to mention to you that you know that the FRA wants us to sign the AHSRA and FY10 funding agreements by December the 31st. So there's a lot of work to be done. I must say the letter of yesterday was obviously making it a little easier for us to do so, because we would have done so. We would have had to do a lot more preparation for the board and everybody for 4 sections. We are now homing into 2 sections, makes it slightly easier for us. Litigation on the Atherton case, the petitioners in this case will participate in a litigation settlement meeting on November the 17th. So on the activities of the board, I would like to refer to the board members to the board policies, and I really request from all board members that they please use my office to communicate with staff, and particularly with contractors and consultants and suppliers, whether they are at the working level or management levels. All this communication outside the norm causes unnecessary confusion and distractions, which we can all do without at this difficult time. I know I'm not always there. I'm generally there kind of something like 18 hours a day on my cell phone, or 20. And otherwise, there's always Kerry and a few others that are there if you need an immediate request. I request you to have to stick with that policy. Finally, I would like you just to, statement I made twice or 3 times today, I would like to say again. Please remember, throughout the process that we're going through now of selection and starting the build of this high-speed rail project that the California really needs, and will help our environment and help our people and help our future. We must remember that this is the backbone of the future transportation for the state. We need to connect Southern California with Northern California, including San Diego and San Francisco and Sacramento as well. The first step of the process is where we will start building. But after that, it is our full intent to build the system as a whole. And we need everybody's focus to continue working. We will set and put together revised rollout plans and staging plans. But we need to keep the focus of everybody that's working on the segments to ensure that we roll this project out, because it's not a short project, it's not a little piece of a project, it's a complete project. That's what high-speed rail is about, connecting Northern California with Southern California and the big metropolitan areas through the Central Valley. So please
even when finally selection is done, let us remember that is the goal, and we must never lose that focus. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Van Ark. Thank you for your service and your leadership, although I do note that apparently you're loafing 4 hours a day. That's a joke in terms of the press here. And also welcome to the team, General Van Winkle. As some of you know, I have a great deal of affection for Army General officers, starting with my wife. So thank you for your anticipated service and leadership. And also, lastly, I would ask Mr. Van Ark to explore the possibility or explore the issues with respect to the FDPC and making sure that the authority is in full compliance and come back to us with a report at the next meeting as to how we certainly are going to accomplish that. All right, without objection. Okay, other reports, members' reports?
Mr. Chairman, I would like a review and report on the public relations contract for our next meeting. As of June, I know about $1,360,000 has been billed, and the contract contains a clause with a limit of $1.5 million a year over 5 years. And I wanted an evaluation of the effectiveness of the services reflected in those bills.
All right, without objection. Commissioner Dearden? You're next to last. Or you get to lead.
No, I'm good,
okay.
I'm good.
I'd like to also welcome General Van Winkle and note that he's joining Admiral Rippey. Do you and I have to, as an old Navy lieutenant and a colonel, have to salute? Now,
that only applies in my home. But, I'm retired.
I'd also like to note that Ruloff spoke before the very large and prestigious San Jose Rotary Club, the mayor and county executive and a dozen judges and so on in attendance, and was recorded by the Commonwealth Club for 230 radio stations across the nation last month, and did a wonderful job, and we appreciate him taking the time to come down and answer questions for a lot of people other than the Rotary in attendance that day. Now, I'd like to comment on the parking issue that I mentioned, I'd like to respond to earlier. I think we're making an error. We're making an error not only because I think it's frightening our potential station location cities, but I think it's also it's deviating from our commitments to the environmental community to try to promote mass transportation with the implementation of our high-speed rail program. And I specifically refer to our engineering teams suggesting firmly to the various cities that are being considered for stations that they have to put in huge parking facilities. Palo Alto has been told that they need 3,000 units of parking. Gilroy's been told the same thing. Now, that's why those two cities are, one has backed out and the other is considering backing out of being a station location. And I personally don't think they should build those. Personal opinion, one member of the board, I don't think they should build 3,000 units of parking. It absolutely reverses the objective that the governor's had in terms of becoming a green state and our objectives of promoting the use of mass transportation as a feeder and distribution system. And I'd like us to ask Ruloff to consider this and look at it carefully and determine if there's a way to allow those cities to scale up their parking if they decide they want parking by building smaller parking facilities, possibly 500 units, 1,000 units at the beginning of the process, and then scaling up if they find it necessary, rather than being told that they need to have 3,000 units of parking, which is a bigger building than any building in their bigger building than most of the buildings put together in their communities. So we've got to figure out how to handle that, or the smaller communities are just not going to want to have stations. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't want that much traffic being drawn into a smaller downtown core by a high-speed rail system. I would like the high-speed rail system, though, to solicit guarantees as much as possible from the local communities that they would promote mass transportation, better bus and rail feeder distribution systems at the high-speed rail facility. So could we have Gridlock bring back a discussion item in regard to access to local stations, especially in the smaller communities?
We could do that. You'll have to give me a little bit of time, but I think we should put it on one of the future board meetings.
Okay. The city of Gilroy is on pins and needles over it now. That was the issue that caused them to vote no confidence in the high-speed rail authority. And I believe it was one of the issues that caused Palo Alto to do the same. And so it's not absolutely urgent now that we're looking in another direction in terms of the starter segment, but it's pretty important to do rather quickly.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Van Ark. No, Vice Chair Schenk.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to just commend Mr. Van Ark for coming in, hitting the ground running, pulling together new staff, new consultants, bringing us, we've been sort of laboring in obscurity for, well, me 30 years on this issue, others for decades, and of course we're an overnight sensation because of the Prop 1A money and the ERA funding. And so all the sites are focused on us, and clearly having only operated with 3 people and not there all the time because of budget constraints, we've done as well as we possibly could, but you've just done a terrific job. However, I would like to say that I encourage you to look into, as soon as we can, to bring in an in-house counsel, an in-house compliance officer. This is an authority of engineers. We're looking to build something extraordinarily significant, but we have to make sure that all rules, regulations, I can't even think of all of them that touch us, are complied with. And I think we will need someone on your staff whose full-time job it is to oversee this. And I know that you feel the same way, and I believe our AG council would love to see that happen as well.
All right. If there's no further business come before the authority,
Sorry, just for those that are still here, the next board meeting was scheduled for December the 2nd. December the 2nd, I just wanted to make sure we are not confirming that here that is the date that was set, because we're still trying to get around to the members, so please watch the internet and you get emails and whatever. But that was the date that was set for the next board meeting. But, we're just trying to see whether we can get the right people around, because it is an important one, at least more so for the people in the valley, because we need to make some final decisions. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
all right, we're adjourned.
Worth the class.
I need that recommendation.